Well, I've started cleaning up the components to get everything ready for the reassembly. So I started with the body, and I can see I've got marks on the pressure plate here which I'll have to polish out. That'll probably come off. Again, that's due to moisture there, probably between the film and the pressure plate. I noticed the back catch is not exactly moving smoothly, and looking into the edge of the body here where the catch runs, it looks discoloured. It looks like there's corrosion present there, and it's certainly not running as smoothly as it should. So I want to remove that whole back catch components. Unfortunately, that means I'll have to remove this piece of leatherette in order to get to them. I strongly prefer not to have to remove the leatherette from the front part of a retina body. Very easily damaged, very reluctant to come off. I'll work from the hinge end and see if I can lift it at that point. I may not remove this leatherette completely, even though I told you that that was a very clever thing to do earlier, simply because I don't like my chances of getting this leatherette off in one piece, and I have no good replacement leatherettes. I can peel it back part way on this edge. That'll be enough for me to get to the screws that hold this plate down and be able to get at that back catch assembly. This leatherette is stuck quite well. In this case, I'm pretty confident that would be glue from the factory, because it's quite uncommon to need to remove these leatherettes. Oh, and I think that's far enough for my purposes. Not going to push my luck. I peel back the leatherette slightly now, I can get at the two retaining screws. Which is most certainly corroded. Number one. Number two, I can remove this plate. That leaves me with my back catch here in the body. Now that back catch, this knob is sprung loaded and it's fixed from the outside. I've got to unscrew that so as I can lift the components out. Unfortunately, that came without a fight. There is a return spring for the button. It's quite small, but it's very stiff. And here is the back catch itself. And you may be able to see the discoloration there. There's probably corrosion products here underneath that leatherette. There's not much you can see there, that's a painted surface. There's just a bit of dust really visible there. So I'll clean these components up and put that back catch back together with a little bit of lubricant once I'm done, a bit of grease. It's got a rough feel to the surfaces, and that's just corrosion products. This is nickel plated. The corrosion products could easily be from the aluminium body. Again, dissimilar metals in close contact, a bit of moisture, it just sets up. That's just ideal for a bit of electrolytic action, particularly on something like a camera where you have had generations of sweaty fingers all over the leatherette. All those salts and fats from the people's skin will just help set up an electrolytic reaction as soon as there's a little bit of moisture present. Here I'm just using a little bit of naphtha, cigarette lighter fluid, to clean these components. Just feeling to see if those surfaces feel smooth, and they do. That probably means that once reassembled, and I'll put a bit of molybdenum over the hook where it catches the back door, that it'll probably work fine. So I'll clean the body now. The same thing, a little bit of naphtha. Just run that cotton bud up underneath where I've peeled the leatherette back, just to wipe out that little part of the body. Make sure that there's no grit or corrosion products under there to cause us a problem with the high friction. So as you can see, a little bit of moisture in a camera can cause a lot of problems. Not all of the problems are easy to foresee. I'm rubbing a bit of molybdenum paste on both surfaces of that catch. And I'll run a little bit onto the hook area where it catches the door, holds the door shut. That should be sufficient. I've dropped the components into place in the body. Check that that runs backwards and forwards in the body smoothly enough. Drop its cover plate in place and refit the two tiny retaining screws. First one. And I'm being very careful here not to peel back the leatherette too far, because I don't want it fracturing. Done my 2 screws up. I'll just check the action of that arm. It does move smoothly. And now I need to refit the button. And to do that, I really need a pin vise. It's awkward to try and get this started with just using your fingers, but a pin vise is just the thing to hold one of these buttons. And that one, I think. That looks doable. The jaws of the pin vise act like a collet chuck, I suppose, and hold things quite firmly. Now I'll just look closely at this tiny spring, and I see no sign of corrosion on it. I'm just going to roll some grease into that with my fingers. Drop that into position. I'll fit it into the button. That'll hold it better. Now I have to hold the catch down with my finger. Push the button into position. Turn it in place with my pin vise. That button's in place. And the back catch works smoothly and positively again. So now have to just tighten that button up, make sure it's snug. And glue down my leatherette. And that little part of the job will be done. Components like that back catch will quite happily go 50 years without requiring any attention at all. So it's an easy component to overlook when you are repairing a camera. In this case we need to check it because of the corrosion caused from this camera having been dropped in the river. And the back catch was still working, but it was stiffer than it should have been. And given the lack of any reasonable lubricant in there, it probably would have ceased to function at some point down the line. And what happens when things like the camera back no longer click neatly into position with a satisfying click is heavy-handed people take it into their heads that it would be a good idea to push a hell of a lot harder to force the back door to close and end up damaging something. Right, so I just rolled that, put some glue on the back of the leatherette, made sure that that edge is rolled back firmly over the camera. and the back catch is good. Now on this camera there is a Zeiss bump, which is a corrosion spot underneath the leatherette right at that point there. Because those leatherettes are so firmly fixed down, I am not going to try and remove the leatherette to get at that. It's just going to have to stay. When you get Zeiss bumps, as they're called, on the backs of cameras, typically it's corrosion patches, most commonly with older cameras that had a leather covering on them. It'll be points where there are dissimilar metals, typically brass rivets into the aluminium camera back, and the salts from the tanning of the leather along with any atmospheric moisture is enough to set up an electrolytic corrosion process, and you end up with patches of corrosion underneath the leatherette or leather at that point. Typically with Zeiss bumps, if you peel the leather back successfully to get to them, you'll find that there is a hard lump of green waxy looking substance causing the lump or causing the bump, and that will be, it's like a, I believe it's like a soap really for practical purposes. It'll be a reaction product of the leather, the tanning agents and the dissimilar metals, but it sets up this waxy green verdigris colour, presumably. It sets up the colour of it. But it's just like a wax or a soap. Alright, well the camera back is now functioning correctly, so I'm quite happy that I've got that body casting good enough. I need to turn my attention to this pressure plate here and see if I can remove those residual marks. So I'll put a bit of naphtha on a cotton bud, and first I'm just going to rub it with that, see if it removes those marks. Also, while I'm doing this, I can feel any roughness on the surface as I swing the cotton bud backwards and forwards over it. And any roughness is certainly something that needs to be attended to. Any sharp mark here would leave a line on the film, tram lines as they're often called. Any speck of corrosion or scratched metal surface or something will scratch the film, and it will show right through onto the negatives. Even if it doesn't cut into the surface of the film, the pressure point that it presents at that in the film at that point will distort the film and cause problems. Now there was a little patch of something stuck right here, but that's just cleaned away. So I'm just checking to make sure that pressure plate is completely smooth. Visual marks are not particularly important. It's important that the surface is smooth. Because the camera is a swimmer, it's worth checking this roller here to make sure that the surface of the roller is smooth, that there are no bumps of corrosion on it. I'm just checking this with my fingernail as I revolve that roller to make sure I don't feel anything on there. That feels fine. And the other end, I'm doing the same thing. These rollers, where they contact the film in this camera, is only at the ends. It's where the sprockets holes would be on the film, so it shouldn't be able to leave any tracks on the film if the surface was less than perfect. But I still want to make sure it runs smoothly. That feels good. Check that my leatherette's stuck down correctly at the end of the camera. And it did. So the camera body can be put aside now. That's an awful lot more work than is normally needed to clean up a camera body. These components, of course, are for the sliding front standard and the bellows cover. I'm just checking them now to have a good look at them. There's a little bit of grit and dust in there. Most of the problem here is not from corrosion as such, it's from dried out grease, and that will just have to be cleaned away.